If you enjoy my podcast, then please subscribe, leave a rating and a review. Please visit my website, mikedelferro.com, where you also will find links to my other podcast, Self-Management for Musicians. You will also find links to my music and my socials. And of course, please share this podcast with anyone interested. Nothing beats the word of mouth. Thank you.
Welcome to another episode of Sounds, Stories, where we dive deep into the lives and music of some of the world's most inspiring artists. I'm your host, Mike Del Ferro. Today, I'm joined by a true master of tone and taste bassist, bandleader and longtime collaborator, Paul Berner. From his roots in the U.S. to his rich musical journey across Europe, Paul has crafted a sound that's as soulful as it is understated. We'll talk about his early influences, what drives his musical choices, and the stories behind some of his most memorable performances. So grab a coffee, sit back, and join us for an intimate conversation with Paul Berner.
I'm sitting here with Paul Berner, wonderful bass player. He has been living in the Netherlands for many years. He's originally from California. Welcome, Paul.
Glad to be here.
Tell me about your history. You were born in California and you studied in Iowa.
I was born in California, but I was gone within a month. My father was in the Navy at the time, and there was a Navy base there. And so I was born on the Navy base. And then he went on to Japan. It was during the Korean War. So my mother stayed in the States, and basically I grew up in Iowa, in a small town in the middle of the Great Plains. So, in fact, I'm really from Iowa. Born in California on my birth certificate, but the rest is in Iowa.
And do you come from a musical family?
Not directly. My father was a dentist, but in his high school years, he played trumpet. And if I believe him, and I do believe him, he worked like 6 or 7 nights a week as a trumpet player with a little trio playing in dance halls and barns and little places around western Iowa with a pianist and a drummer, and sometimes with a second horn player. So he played, and my grandfather, his father, was also even a multi-instrumentalist. I think he mostly played accordion, but he also did that kind of work. So it's kind of there in the family without them actually being musicians themselves. You know, they did that on the side, but there was music around, and there was a selection of records, albums that I could listen to, and so yeah, not directly, but it was there a little bit. You know, I didn't know there were professional musicians until after I'd started studying music at conservatory level. Huh? I mean, that little town where I grew up, I didn't really know where the music came from, of course, from professional musicians, but it never occurred to me that there were people that did that. I thought a music teacher was as far as you could get. And only when I went to conservatory did I realize, oh, there are people that only do this. Whoa, that's interesting.
So that's how remote that place was.
It was it's hard to imagine nowadays how remote that is. A little town of 1,500 people in the middle of the cornfields in Iowa, yeah.
Without a jazz club, I suppose.
Hardly a jazz club. I mean, there was no one to play with, no one to take lessons with. There was the local band director from the high school, and they always had their own instrument, but they were taught to give lessons, just like school music everywhere, on all instruments. And I luckily had someone for a year or two who had taken string instruments, and I think that was an option. I don't think they had to do that, but he liked string instruments, and he couldn't really play, so it means that he probably had a bass in his hands for 6 weeks during his studies. But he kind of taught me a reasonable left-hand technique and really liked a good sound, a bowed sound that was nice, and so he encouraged that. But the funny part about it, when I went to audition at the university in the music department, which is basically a conservatory, I went to the bass teacher and I said, I'd like to have bass lessons. And he said, okay, well, here's a bass. you can play something for me. Which kind of bow do you play? And with double bass, you have a French bow, which is like a big cello bow, and a German bow, which is held underhand, almost like a spade handle. And, well, I knew this. I said, I play French bow. And he handed me a bow of a type I'd never seen before, because in my high school years, from like 15, 16 till 18, I'd been playing a German bow using a French grip. So he didn't realize that there were two different bows. He knew there were two different grips, but he didn't know there were two different bows, my high school teacher. And only when I went to the conservatory did I realize there was a difference. There were two different bows, and I'd been playing the bow the wrong way, but still getting a sound. So, it was far away.
I was going to say, you literally came from far away.
Yeah.
Wow. And was there already jazz there, or was your...
No.
How did you discover jazz?
My dad had some records. He had, I could almost tell you, there were probably 6 or 7 records. He had a Stan Getz record. He had a Jerry Mulligan Quartet with Art Farmer record, which I basically know every note of. He had a couple Dave Brubeck records, but when I was, 12, 13, 14, I put them on and I just couldn't get interested. But at some point I put on the Stan Getz record and he played Over the Rainbow. And I hated that song. I just only knew the version with Judy Garland from the movie, The Wizard of Oz. And, with the strings, and it was just so sentimental and horrible. I hated it. But Stan Getz played ba 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 doo ba wa ba ya doo da da da, and I thought, oh, that's Over the Rainbow, but it's nice. I like it. And that's when I thought, oh, yeah, that's jazz. I get it. And then after that, I started buying some records. You had to look long ways in those days to find any records with jazz. But whatever I found, I bought and listened to.
But then you're basically self-taught in jazz.
Self-taught. I mean, I put together a small jazz group to play at the music evening, that at the end of the year, the music program presents a concert, and I wanted to have a small jazz group. Well, the band teacher at that time didn't have any idea how to put together a small jazz group, so I basically taught the people how to play jazz, 4 or 5 other students, and I can't imagine what it sounded like, but we played jazz, yeah.
And that at some point you moved away from Iowa, and where did you go?
Then I went to study also in Iowa and at the University of Iowa. And there I luckily had an excellent bass teacher, Eldon Obrecht, classical bass teacher. All my schooling was classical because that's what you did at the time. There weren't any jazz departments yet. And I did a bachelor there, and then I went on and did a master's at Indiana University with Murray Grodner. And Indiana had one of the first jazz departments at conservatory level in America. This was in the 70s, the middle 70s. And the jazz department at Indiana was one person. It was Dave Baker. And all the jazz students took their instrument lessons from the classical teachers there. So, but at Indiana, you came into contact with students from not so much local, but from the whole area, from St. Louis, from Chicago, from Detroit, even from the East Coast. And so from there, you could imagine going someplace and playing music. And so from there, I eventually moved to New York and spent basically the 80s. With 79, I think I moved, until I moved to the Netherlands.
Yeah, but the beautiful sound you have on the bass probably has to do with your amazing classical training.
I mean, I can't imagine trying to get along without a classical training on the bass. But that was my background.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy my podcast, then please subscribe, leave a rating and a review. Please visit my website, mikedelferro.com, where you also will find links to my other podcast, Self-Management for Musicians. You will also find links to my music and my socials. And of course, please share this podcast with anyone interested. Nothing beats the word of mouth. Thank you. What's your take on jazz musicians and classical technique in general? There's this saying like, if you're a jazz musician, then without classical training, you cannot sound as good as... What's your take on this?
If it sounds good, it is good, huh?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, everybody has their own path. And of course, there's that old jazz musician line about, I had private lessons, but it didn't hurt my playing.
That's the other way to look at it. Yeah.
So, but in the period that I went to go and study, I, looked at the bass players that I was listening to, and that was Ron Carter and Richard Davis and David Holland and Miroslav Vitus, and they'd all had classical lessons. So I thought, that's what you do.
Yeah.
You do that.
Yeah.
And I don't have any regrets. I mean, getting to play in orchestras and all the things you get to do from there. Reading orchestral music is really different than just reading jazz charts. It gives you a much broader idea of what's going on.
Yeah. Bowing, intonation, all of that.
Intonation, bowing is essential for intonation. You can't really learn intonation by just plucking. So
yeah. And then you went to New York?
And then I moved to New York, And that actually went pretty fast the first few years. My first gig in New York was with a guitar trio, guitar, bass, drums, on the corner of 48th and Broadway. And we played for the people going to the theater before they went into the theater, and then we played again when they had the intermissions, because then people would come outside and hang around, and we'd play again and make a little money, and I'd make just about enough money to go out that night and go to some jazz clubs and meet some musicians and talk to people and, get around a little bit. My first gig indoors was with the same band, and it was from 5 till 9 in the morning. It was an after-hours club.
5 till 9 in the morning. That's horrible.
I couldn't decide if I should go to bed and get back up again, or if I should just stay up until 4 o'clock and then go to the gig. And the funny part was when I left and I tried to get a taxi home, I was competing with people that were going to work.
Stuck in the morning traffic.
Yeah. They were trying to get taxis to work, and I was trying to get a taxi to bring me back to my house after I'd worked. So but we didn't do that gig very often. It was pretty rough. So that started like that. But within a year, I was playing in the band of Red Rodney, the trumpet player that had worked with Charlie Parker, of course. And we recorded actually a couple of albums. They eventually made it into a couple of albums, but we played in the Village Vanguard and recorded live there. And man, some of the records that I originally started with and bought when I was 16 were live at the Village Vanguard, and bam, there I was, live at the Village Vanguard.
That's amazing, huh?
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing.
Yeah. So growing up in a small city in Iowa and getting to that point, because I have a list here of people you've played with. It's impressive, to name a couple of people: Stan Getz, Peter Erskine, Monty Alexander, the late Jim Beard.
Yeah.
Amazing, underrated pianist in my opinion.
Very much so, yeah.
Incredible. Passed away a couple of years ago, too young. And of course, there is Lionel Hampton.
Yeah.
To talk about musicians nowadays, but who has played with Lionel Hampton? Yeah,
that was really old school. I mean, I thought he was ancient when I played with him, and I think he was just in his 60s. I don't think he was that old. because he went on for another 20, 30 years after I left him in the early 80s. But yeah, Lionel was on the one hand excellent, on the other hand a kind of a challenge, because there was always a sort of a show element with Lionel. He'd sing and joke around and play some drums and, not just play the vibraphone, which was his main instrument, of course. But every gig, he'd play something with the vibraphone where I would say, wow, what was that? What? It was just some different way of putting it together that amazed me. I mean, he was really an amazing musician. And as I said, really old school. He was the band leader. And what he said was the rule. Like you hear stories about, say, Benny Goodman and the old band leaders from the 30s. But it was fabulous to see how that worked, because he would play, well, basically he would decide how long the band played. And at festivals, they'd always put him on at the end of the program and last on the day, because he would never play an hour set. If you said play an hour set, he'd play 2 hours just to show that he was the boss, And in different situations, I've seen them like turn off the lights, turn off the electricity in the concert hall just to try and make him stop, and that only makes him go longer. So
we still do "Hey Baba Reba."
Hey Baba Rebop till you're dead, and then he'd go marching with the horn players and do "The Saints Go Marching In" and go walk into the hall, through the whole auditorium, maybe out into the lobby, and then come back. And I mean, it was a whole thing, So yeah.
And was that because, I mean, if you are that famous at some point and probably wealthy, whatever,
yeah,
why would you still need that show element? And is that just because of a habit? What do you think?
It's the way he learned how to do it. I think that was the way he got popular, the way he was, like in the 40s and 50s when he went out on his own. As a band leader and leading a big band, that was how he got popular, was by doing those kind of shows. And it was, almost kind of a borderline rhythm and blues kind of a thing. Yeah. With the Hey Baba Rebops and the really popular things. And like I said, he'd play some jazz every concert that blew me away, but that was just also for the people, until if the people didn't stand up and cheer at the end, he'd just keep on going until they did. That had to be a show. It wasn't just the music. It was, of course, that was what happened after the Second World War, the bebop revolution, and how players in that period, they started playing purely for the music. And before that period, in the 1920s, 1930s, it was much showier. It's more like rock music in the 70s and 80s, where, I mean, there were amazing musicians, but there was a whole bunch of show going on too. Yeah. And I think that just becomes automatic, that you just that's what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And were those tours where you would be in the bus for months, traveling every day?
No. He would go out for a couple of weeks at a time, and then we'd be back in New York for a couple of weeks. In the summer, he would always go to Europe for at least a month, 6 weeks. Also he'd go to Japan or in the Orient also for a few weeks, but it was usually broken up. I mean, the band members all lived. I mean, it's not like, Duke Ellington's band or Count Basie's band where the people literally lived in the bus. They many of them didn't have an apartment. With Lionel, the band wasn't that busy. We all still maintained a place in New York while we were doing the gigs. So
you could do other stuff as well, of course.
And you could do other stuff in between. Yeah. Though he was very jealous about that too. You didn't want to let any of your other gigs get in the way, or even let him know you were doing other gigs. He kind of wanted to know that you were exclusively with him. So
yeah. And what about Monty Alexander?
Monty Alexander is, of course, he's 8 or 9 years older than I am, so he's from a really different generation. But in a way, he was one of the youngest cats from the generation of like the 50s going into the 60s, you know. So I don't know if that made his attitude different, but his attitude is completely different. He's also very clearly the leader, but he's a lot more relaxed in the role than Lionel was. You know, you don't get the feeling like with Monty, it's like you're traveling with a friend. You know, I mean, he's the leader, but at the same time, it's very relaxed. Yeah,
More friend family kind of feeling rather than
Yeah.
So in 1990 you came to the Netherlands.
Yeah.
What made you move here?
Well, basically a quality of life change. Huh? My wife is Dutch, so that's part of the reason. But we spent like a year before we moved. You know, I'd been in New York for about 10 years at that point and had done a lot of things I wanted to do in New York. And for her, New York was difficult. She moved to New York in, 83 or 84? So she'd been there for 6 or 7 years. And it was more like, okay, we live in Manhattan still. You know, where do we want to be in 10 years or in 20 years? And it's not in Manhattan anymore. Maybe someplace outside New York, Westchester, New Jersey, or maybe another city in America, maybe someplace in Europe. So we spent a year kind of looking at the possibilities, and eventually decided on Amsterdam and moved to Amsterdam in the end of 1990. And yeah, it's a quality of life thing. You know, it's just after New York, it's a lot easier. Like, I mean, the neighborhood I lived in New York for the longest period was actually a kind of a family neighborhood, mostly Puerto Rican families, but a lot of like Irish and Jewish older people who had lived there before and had their families there. But my car was broken into like about once a month. Yeah. And it got to be, I had a good lock on it so they couldn't start the engine. But it got to be, I'd go get my car and get in it and think, oh yeah, somebody was in here. And then I'd just drive away and go to where I wanted to go. It got to be sort of normal. And at some point you have to ask yourself if that's how you want to live, you know, like that kind of situations where it's at some point, probably something's going to go wrong, you know? So yeah, that was behind it. And of course, living in the Netherlands is, it's a well-organized country, despite what they say. As long as they keep complaining, it'll stay pretty well organized. And so we've been here since then, more than 30 years now.
Yeah, and then you started playing with the Dutch jazz scene, but also with you toured a lot in Europe as well, right?
I've done some touring in Europe. I kind of thought that might work out, but it's also a little bit, it's a little trickier than I expected to try and do that. I know there are some American musicians who move to Europe and they never learn the local language and they remain sort of outside of the scene, the local scene, because they want to remain as an American, you know, to be seen as an American. And I didn't really do that. I mean, I'd learned a little bit of Dutch before I moved, but I worked on it when I got here and started speaking Dutch and started working with local musicians and ended up being, for many years, really busy with playing all kinds of music. I mean, I'm always thought of myself mainly as a jazz player, but I also play, in addition to double bass, I also play bass guitar and have done a lot of what they call here commercial work, you know, parties and shows and that sort of thing. So, and I enjoy doing that as well, you know, so I've done a lot of different kinds of things. One nice spot was during COVID, I went on tour with Monty again because there was a period where American musicians were not allowed to, or Americans in general were not allowed to enter Europe, and due to the restrictions at the time. But Monty had a drummer he was working with, Jason Brown, and Jason was living at that time in London. He was an American but living in London, so he was already in Europe. This is before Brexit. Well, in any case, London was considered, no, it was after Brexit, but it was in any case, London was considered to be Europe. And Monty is originally from Jamaica and has a Jamaican passport as well as an American passport. So he needed a bass player that was in Europe, and he knew me. We've been in touch through the years. Played a couple of things when he was, had a problem getting a bass player, and so I could bail him out. But that was just a couple of concerts. But we kind of toured for about a year in Europe and went to Japan one time, and that was kind of a nice little return of that gig to get to work with those gentlemen for like I say, about a year during the COVID period.
That's great. Is he still working a lot, Monty Alexander?
Like a lot of people, I don't think he's working as much as he ever did, but he's still busy. He's still out there. He's, what did I say? He just turned 80.
Yeah.
He turned 80. No, he just turned 81 this year, just a week ago or so. His birthday is on D-Day, which is why he has the name. His mom named him Montgomery after the British general, Montgomery Alexander, and that became, of course, Monty. But he was born on D-Day and named after the English general that was the head of the English forces at the time.
And one of the most swinging pianists.
Incredibly. I mean,
that swing.
Oh, man. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. It's really unbelievable.
The man cannot play a note that doesn't swing. No. And in addition to fabulous ears and a great sense of structure, which you sometimes, if you've only heard him on recordings, you might miss. You really have to hear him live, because the way he puts together a tune has all these variables in it that when he records, he edits himself a bit. Sometimes he would play an introduction, a vamp introduction to a tune, and you play the introduction 4 times and you go to the tune. But he might get into the vamp and be enjoying it, and he'll play the vamp for 10 minutes and then sort of play the tune at the end as an afterthought. Or he might vamp a couple of times, go to the tune, and then go back to the vamp and play there for a while, or then play the tune for a while. So that how the tune works as a total structure, you kind of miss that on the albums that he's made. Because, like as I say, I've noticed when he records, he tends to edit himself a bit. But hearing him live, is you see it happening, and of course playing with him live, you have to be on your toes the whole time.
I find recording, being a musician, I find it the hardest thing to do in the whole spectrum of being a musician.
It's red light fever.
Yeah. Live, I'm much more free and much more inventive, and and there's always this kind of restriction. How do you say? Is edit yourself?
Yeah, you edit it a little bit.
Yeah.
You think, maybe I'm going on too long while you're playing live. You never think that. You just play until it's done, and you go right on. Yeah.
Challenging recording.
That's a big challenge. Yeah.
What about your own projects?
Yeah, when I turned 50. My wife asked me if I'd wanted to give a big party, or a lot of people, that's a big birthday moment, turning 50. And she said, would you want to do something big? And I thought, I'm not so partyish. I'm not that. That's not, And she said, well, what would you like to do? And I said, make an album. And she said, okay, we'll put the money from the party to making the album. And I recorded my first album as a band leader, as a leader in the year that I turned 50. I asked Monty to play a couple of tunes, so we ended up doing 4 tunes, piano-bass duo, and recorded the rest of the album with Frans de Rond, with Frits Landersbergen on vibraphone, and Ed Verhoef on guitar, and Dre Palamarts on drums. Yeah, that was. There was a whole process going into that, being a bass player, thinking about, how you can make that work. I love piano trios, but a piano trio works the best if the pianist leads it. And if the bass player leads it, everything will be like, okay. You're going to lead. I'm going to lead. There's a structure to it that's natural when the pianist leads. And if the drummer or the bassist tries to lead, it just doesn't work the same way. So I very consciously picked two instruments to play with that are both chord instruments, but can play the single lines as well. And so there's not really a leader. If you come to one of those joint moments, like what's going to happen next, it's not obvious if the vibraphone or the guitar will take over the next part. It leaves more space for the bass player, to be the leader, because it's not a usual sort of lineup: vibes, guitar, bass, drums.
Yeah, and in your music, I hear a lot of influences like, how would you call it, Americana, or the kind of folky, probably things from Iowa where you grew up?
Yeah, whenever I wrote a tune, I'd written a little bit before then, but somehow it didn't come out sounding like what I thought jazz was supposed to sound like. And working towards this album, I was writing music and thinking, ooh, I don't know if this is really jazz or not, and I was kind of worried about that. And at some point I was in you still had record stores at that time, CD stores, and I was in one of those stores in the jazz department, and all of a sudden music comes on that's like the music I had in my head, very close to it. And I thought, oh, my God, what's this? It was Bill Frisell in around his Nashville period when he was recording that kind of thing. Yeah. And I heard that and I thought, oh, yeah, something like that. And then I thought, oh, damn, he's already done it. I'm too late. But that gave me the courage to go ahead and just let the tunes be what they would be when I wrote them. And they kind of came out that way, with influences from Americana, from folk music, which was actually sort of the first music that I played. Before I played double bass, I played guitar and acoustic guitar because in that little town, there were no musicians to play with. So I played acoustic guitar and learned folk music because you could do that alone. And so I had that influence, but also the sort of harmonies and things that I would hear going on in pop music intrigued me, and some of the structures I heard there, and I would borrow things from that and apply them in a different way to jazz, but they were structures that I was borrowing from pop music, the way that works, the way it works harmonically and form-wise. So, yeah, that's those elements are all in there, yeah.
You assimilated everything from a lifetime playing experience and
in a way,
where you're from and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting that in the 80s when I was still in New York, at some point I was playing with two friends of mine, a drummer and a saxophone player, and we had a jazz trio together, but they were both involved in a pop band writing like rock oriented pop music. And the sax player played keyboards in that band, and the drummer was a drummer. And I can remember getting my bass guitar out of the closet because I didn't play it that much at the time, and just looking at it for a while, just putting it on the couch and just looking at it and thinking, if I played that instrument, I thought, then I'd also be doing that kind of music because it's cool, it's rhythmic, it has great feel, it's
beautiful.
It's beautiful music, There's just no double bass in it, but there is bass. And so at some point I asked them if there was something I could do, and I started writing with them. And when I started writing, I realized I don't really have any chops on keyboards or on piano, but I could still play guitar. And I hadn't played it for 10 years or longer, but I went out and bought a guitar and started writing on the guitar, and eventually ended up playing guitar in that band. Now, the band never really got off the ground in a way, it was a good band, but just for various reasons never really happened. But we also played as a copy band doing like rock music of the period. So I was learning all these tunes by The Police and U2 and ZZ Top and all these tunes that were going on at the time in rock music. And so those harmonies were kind of, there was all things that I'd picked up along the way just playing guitar in this band. Mm. So yeah, that's like you say, just this collection of influences that kind of came together when I started writing jazz. And I realized it's jazz. You want some place where people can improvise. I mean, in jazz, basically the tune is an excuse to improvise.
Yeah.
And so I tried to build that into it, not make it too restrictive.
What's the name again of this album?
The first album I made was called Open Country.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
Open
beautiful.
Country. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, what about your online presence? Do you have a website or?
There's a website that has some basic information and contact information and a little bit of story about me. No, but my main place to go if you're interested in my music is my Bandcamp site, Paul Berner at Bandcamp. And you'll find almost, just thinking here before I say it, I think all my albums are on there. Yeah, all the albums are up now. So you can find all the music there and check it out, just listen to it. And if you like, you can take some home with you. So.
Yeah, and Bandcamp is actually becoming an interesting community. It's quite big now.
Yeah, it's a great place, and I'm always amazed when I find out who is on Bandcamp. I mean, I think it was started by people that were sort of independent and maybe not interesting for big time labels, but I mean, there are huge artists on Bandcamp, and at all levels, really interesting artists. So.
This podcast is also for Soundliation. Frans de Rond is an incredible Dutch recording engineer, and he has a way of recording. It's called the one mic system.
Yeah, and I've done that on the last couple of albums I've made with him. I know he and Peter Bjornild, who also works with him as a sort of producer, the one who organizes things, and Frans then, sits behind the mixing board and organizes it there. And they came with this idea, and the first one we did they were recorded in a more sort of normal way with, mics on the various instruments and then the mic in the room for the ambience and recorded at live concerts. And that was with my own group, which at that time was Ed Verhoef still on guitar and Peter Thiehuis also on guitar and Michael Moore on clarinet and saxophone. And we did 2 albums like that, live concerts that were recorded at the same time. And he brought them out on Sound Liaison as a high-end version, and then I would bring them out as a CD version or online. But at some point, that band kind of stopped, partially because of COVID, and, we'd done it for 10 years. And Michael Moore asked me if I would like to play in a duo. We started doing that also in the COVID period. We could get together with the 2 of us in a reasonably large space and thus not have to worry about the dangers. And we just started playing some tunes that he wanted to play. I brought in a couple, but it's mostly his choice of repertoire, American Songbook, but also Joni Mitchell and some tunes of his and Thelonious Monk, just different things. And Sound Liaison, Frans de Rond, was interested in doing that and recording that for us. And that's the first time we did the one mic technique. It was just a clarinet and a double bass. And it's an incredibly simple setup. For musicians, it's fabulous because, one, you don't wear headphones. You only play to the room because there's nothing else to hear than the person standing next to you. And the mix is simple. You play a tune, you go up and listen. And as I recall, we thought, it sounds great. Maybe the clarinet could be a little softer. So he moved back about a meter and we played another one and checked it. Yeah, that's it. And that was the mix. that's all that was done. And the rest is just exactly the way it sounded in the room.
Very beautiful, very natural. I believe it's called Josephson, right? The microphone.
Yeah, the Josephson, yeah. But it makes it, in a way, really easy to forget about the microphone. So the results are really nice, you know? It just feels really natural playing it that way, you know? I mean, like you say, there's often a sort of, I mean, there are more reasons than one for worrying about recording, but one of them is the fact that you don't know how you'll hear things because you're often set up differently than you would set up if you play a concert. And with the Josephson one mic recordings, it's just like your rehearsal or playing at home or wherever you're playing in a small club. You set up with the instruments in a way that you can hear everything, and then you play.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
No headphone mix, and you don't need to bother with all these things. Yeah.
And you hear your instrument directly from your instrument instead of via the headphones, and So there's a lot that I mean, Franz would be the one to ask. I know they've experimented already, done some recordings with larger groups. This was just a duo. And then later, I came in with a project with guitarist Tim Longendijk, and Tim plays flat top acoustic in that project, so it's also a duo, guitar and bass, and a similar setup with that same Josephson microphone. And yeah, I mean, it sounds just gorgeous, you know, the sound that you get. It's just like being in the room, except better.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'll put all the links in the show notes of this episode. Also, Sound Nation, your Bandcamp.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, and any advice to young musicians?
Whoa, that's a turnaround. My advice is you'd have to be crazy to want to go into music, and if you're crazy, you might have a chance.
Yeah.
That's the most I can say. I mean, the scene, because at this point, I've seen so many different scenes come and go, so many different periods. I mean, when I first started out, there were people that were still saying, yeah, the big bands are coming back. This rock music, it'll never last. The big bands will come back. And they believed it too. And I knew that wasn't going to happen, but these guys believed it, And so, I mean, I've seen so many different things go on, and so many different, ways that music works in the whole society. So you can't really know ahead of time if that's going to work or not. So you'd have to be crazy to go into music. And if you're crazy, you might have a chance, If you want to do it so bad you can't imagine doing anything else, you might have a chance, And
then be very persistent.
You'd be very persistent, but that's part of being crazy, Yeah. It's just that's what you want to do, and just do it and do it and do it and do it.
Yeah, and part of being a musician.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Great being here.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy my podcast, then please subscribe, leave a rating and a review. Please visit my website, mikedelferro.com, where you also will find links to my other podcast, Self-Management for Musicians. You will also find links to my music and my socials. And of course, please share this podcast with anyone interested. Nothing beats the word of mouth. Thank you.